Doing a relationship mapping exercise like that can really help give us focus and strategy on how to build relationships. This goes back to managing emotions because building relationships is part of that area. And so that gives us a way to not, oh, I have to do better at building relationships and it's overwhelming. But then now you got some focus to it when you take inventory, so to speak, of all your key stakeholders. If you need to borrow somebody else's story, please do. But it's again, if you can, be the one to really say it and feel it, it's more impactful. Don't make yourself the hero. Highlight a struggle. So we want to be able to learn from a lesson, a mistake, a conflict. Keep it simple. You don't need to talk about on the third Tuesday of the month, this happened. Eliminate extraneous details and then practice it. Because again, the more we practice, the more we get comfortable and the more we can show confidence in our influence.
And the name, Karen Eber?
Eber, E-B-E-R, yes.
Excellent. Thank you. The power of storytelling, and even that statement you made, Erin, that data does not necessarily change minds. Story and emotion changes minds.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so we have introduced a very different way of defining and framing and acting upon executive presence and influence. So here's the summing up question for you, Erin. What's the one thing that people can take away and act on? What's the one idea if they want to develop their ability to effectively influence others? What's the one thing they should really emphasize from all of our conversation today?
If I had to boil it down to one thing to work on, it's active listening. Active listening is where it's at. And simply because active listening, I believe, is a secret weapon in building trust with others. And trust leads to influence.
And as we have a few more minutes before we wrap up, folks who are listening, please share any questions you have. There are a couple of other elements we can touch upon. One is this remote aspect. Many of these seem very logical in a face-to-face environment. Erin, as you work with so many different leaders, any comments you have in terms of how these apply to a remote or virtual setting? Is it yep, exactly apply? Or is there any considerations, any mindset that we would want to adapt or consider within a remote Teams Zoom world as well that we should consider as we think of this executive presence influence idea?
Yeah. Well, I would say for the most part, it certainly applies, and I'll say, and your Zoom presence is what you have if that's all you have to deal with. So turn the camera on. Make sure you're using all you can within that frame to show your nonverbals, to show you're actively listening, to be present with others. That is a way you can up your game, and in a Zoom or a hybrid or a virtual environment, because frankly, having camera off is also a nonverbal signal and signals things to others. And it may or may not be the message you want to signal. So I think that's a consideration, and it's a very powerful one that we can use. So I think we could still use all the things, all the skills.
All the different ways to show up as best you can, for sure. Absolutely. And then within all of this, how does one adjust and adapt and consider the needs of the other person in all of this? How does that fit in terms of the different relationships? Because we all have a boss, we have a team, we have peers, we have others. How does that fit in to all of the things we've talked about then? How does that show up? What would you say as you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's always a good exercise to look at your key stakeholders that you interact with the most. So your boss, your peers, direct reports, if you have them, and your customers, and understand how you think they're perceiving you. Right. So how are they perceiving you? And be honest, right? Take inventory, write it out. And if there's a gap, if you think there's a gap in what you want it to be, then you know that's where you need to put more focus in that particular relationship. So doing a relationship mapping exercise like that can really help give us focus and strategy on how to build relationships. This goes back to managing emotions, because building relationships is part of that area. And so that gives us a way to not, I have to do better at building relationships and it's overwhelming. But then now you got some focus to it when you take inventory, so to speak, of all your key stakeholders.
Yeah. And building on this relationship, let's address this question and then we'll wrap up here. There's a question here. How do you get frontline leaders to speak up with their peers? Because sometimes they might be reluctant for whatever reason. How do you help them voice their thoughts as they're with their peers more often? What would you say, Erin?
I saw that question, and I must say I struggled a bit to because it's a very broad question. So I'm not really sure how to answer that without knowing any context. I don't know if I can get context on that.
So it's a good question. Additional context. As you're thinking through, Erin, even without the context, what are some ways to consider? What are things to consider as one would want to think through how to even approach it? What would you say?
Well, I would. So a couple things with a broad brush. I would encourage if folks are having trouble speaking up or communicating to others, first step is understanding everyone's unique styles and motivations is a good place to start. For example, does somebody prefer email or text, or do they prefer in person, face to face? How do they prefer receiving information? Finding out those cues and preferences is helpful to gain confidence to be able to say, oh yeah, I know this person. They love just kind of if you just do a flyby and fly by their office and pop in and give information. I'm just using that as an example. So understanding unique styles, preferences, communications, utilizing the people that you have as intel. So again, that's a little bit of organizational savviness there. So using people that may know more about can give you insight. How does so-and-so like to receive information? How can I get to know so-and-so better? So that's how I would start to address that.
I love it. And what you're getting at, Erin, is getting deeper to understand how people then process information, how they work, their styles, to get more specific at the individual, which really comes through many of the themes you've talked about all the hour here, which is really getting specific and being present with the other, whoever that might be, and being engaged with them.